Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session of the FinOps Excellence Summit called Banker Secrets to Proving Cloud Value. Now, we all know cloud spend isn't just a cost, but it's also an investment. And like any investment, it demands a return. And that's why in today's session, we're going to cover how to shift the conversation from pure cost cutting to actual value creation. My name is Mridula. I lead product marketing for our cloud cost management module here at Harness. And I am so thrilled to be joined by two amazing panelists here today, Sally from United Airlines and Brittany from Trace3. Now, I'd love to give you two a minute to introduce yourselves to the audience, maybe tell them a little bit about who you are, what you do, and how you got into the role of FinOps. Maybe, Sally, we could start with you.
So, hi, everybody. I am Sally Serta. Thank you, Harness, for hosting me. I currently oversee the cloud and platform engineering practices at United. So, obviously, a lot of the work that we do are around backbone infrastructure engineering, platform development, CI/CD, cloud cost optimization is one of the practices under FinOps that we currently oversee as well. So, before that, actually, my background is in engineering, in addition to cloud and platform space, but also data center support. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. Yeah, excited to be here as well. So my name is Brittany Hamill. I lead the Cloud FinOps Consulting Service Delivery team at Trace3. So Trace3 as a whole kind of helps people through, or clients through their whole FinOps journey, whether that's implementing FinOps at their organization or maybe augmenting some of their expertise at the organization. So the FinOps group at Trace3 has been around for about 8 years now, and I've been with the team for about 5 of those. So before my role in FinOps, I was more on the traditional finance side of the house. So kind of bringing some of that lens into the FinOps world and into the cloud space.
Of course, I'm super excited to have you both here and love that you both bring different perspectives as well. Okay, so let's get into it. And we'll start with the big question. You know, tracking cloud value is something that everyone wants to do, but many teams still struggle with it. So why do you think tracking cloud value is still a challenge? And what is a mindset shift that can turn cloud from a cost center into a value engine?
So I think part of the challenges with cloud value is cloud is seen like a sunk cost a lot of times in the financials. So typically when organizations move to a cloud, they're doing it out of business necessity. Often the conversation of FinOps and how to really understand why are we moving, what is the value of moving, happens much later in some cases. So I think what's important to know is as you are building, right, and you're deriving business value, features, capabilities, how do you tie that and understand what is the value of this investment to this new capability in my mobile site, my website? So I think having that step back, having that analysis reports, certainly tying that back to cost, I think is very telling in terms of like why we moved to the cloud.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think there's a ton of value to derive from being in the cloud, but I think it takes, you know, companies to be looking beyond just cost as that driver, right? So I think that's ultimately a part of the cultural shift that FinOps looks to enable, but it requires companies to kind of look from that lens and take a step back, like you said, right, Sally? So, you know, just an example to go through of that kind of innovation, right, is the speed to development. Engineers have things at the click of a button. No longer are we required to go through procurement cycles. And kind of with that, cloud providers have all these services that engineers can just plug into. They're not building from scratch all the time. And ultimately, you know, those two things tied together just leads to more innovation or like quicker product cycles and, you know, quicker product launches, right? Which is business value right there, right? You know, often those product launches usually come with a revenue side, right? Hopefully. So, you know, tying it and thinking of it as like a faster way to get to those product launches is just one example of kind of how the cloud can really be that value engine and that kind of quickness to it.
I love what both of you said here, you know, whether it's like reframing cloud, not just as like a technical platform, but as like a productivity driver, and really having that like cultural shift. It kind of will change the conversation from why are we spending this to like, how do we invest more strategically? And that actually leads perfectly to my next question, which is like, now that we see the cloud differently, how do we start talking about it differently? Right? We all know that many FinOps conversations start with somebody asking like, why is the bill so high? So it's like natural that a lot of the early wins center around cost savings. But at some point we have to move past that, right? So how can FinOps teams shift the conversation from just cost cutting to actually being able to demonstrate business value?
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right? Most FinOps teams, if you've heard FinOps in the world, you've probably heard something about savings, or cloud cost optimization is really kind of what was born into FinOps. So I think savings will always be a key pillar of FinOps. Like, we are all cost conscious people, but it's not the full story, right? So shifting to try to get more of that full story, I think, is what, FinOps is looking to enable. So I think there's a natural shift with, just the evolution of FinOps and the maturing of FinOps teams, that cost optimization is now a little bit more built in, right? There's a ton of literature out there and kind of strategies out there that FinOps teams are now developing. So I think most mature FinOps teams have some level of optimization practices in place. So then comes, there's a natural shift in conversation to, do we need this resource, or are we getting the cheapest rate, into, well, why do we need this resource, right? If there's confidence that we are running efficiently in the cloud, I think the next logical step is the why, right? And that why is where you're going to unlock a lot of the business value. So I think collaborating with the product and engineering teams, they hold the keys to a lot of the why, right? They're the ones that can answer the question of, was this spend spike related to a new feature launch? Or is this VM sized this way because it's enhancing customer performance, right? I think gearing questions and framing questions like that is what has the FinOps team look more like they're enabling innovation and kind of pushing forward that innovation, and not just centering around cutting costs.
Yeah, I think, just bouncing on some of the things that Brett mentioned. When you think of organically how teams work, they're moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour, right? They have a lot of delivery they have to do for typically many parts of the organization. So as I viewed FinOps as an enabler, it's also shifting to the point of the conversation. I'm trying to cut the bill as much as possible to, how do I enable them to be efficient, right? And a lot of that is through the technology that's available to them. That's through right-sizing the databases. That's through creating patterns to deploy your applications to a container-based model. So really, I think it's part of it is giving them the patterns and capabilities to live in the cloud efficiently, while also having the right insights to understand, now that I've moved from on-prem to the cloud, I've cut my, my bill from X to Z, right? That's very telling, not just at the engineering level, but also at the leadership level. So for us, it's been more about, how do we embed a culture of efficiency through the technology, but also build champions within those teams, right? Really have the same voices of the FinOps team within each of the app dev team, of understanding like, hey, you're architecting and designing. We have things available that will help you get there faster. Maybe these will be more efficient for you. I would say there's other aspects of like the recommendations, right? Things that you would derive from a CCM, where as you're building an engineering, it's also telling them, hey, you have this much storage available here. If you shifted it or decreased it, you would save this much from your perspective, right? So there's the capabilities of show back, and then the technical pieces that we provide them to go faster, but we know we've built it in such a way that it's going to save us dollars. And that's why I've seen be successful, at least from our perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, building that culture of, especially building those like FinOps champions within your teams, and also like bringing other teams like product or engineering into the FinOps loop, that's kind of how you can connect the spend to actual outcomes. So once we've made that mindset shift, right, and we're starting to think about value, the next step is to define what that value actually means. And, when we're talking about ROI, depending on who you're speaking to, return can mean different things. So how do you define return on your cloud investments, and what are some of the top metrics that help you kind of prove that ROI?
Yeah, I think there's a few for us. I think first is business agility, right? At the end of the day, we're all supporting the business. We're supporting key capabilities that service our customers at the airports, internally. So how fast are we delivering from a cycle, from build, release to deploy, even the further left, right, to ideation? Certainly, one of the things we try to do as much as possible is automate all the pieces that can be automated, and then you always think in the security and the FinOps lens, I said now, right? They're both kind of critical components of how we develop software. So there's a business agility in terms of just faster time to market. It's always great to commit to a date and we deliver it 2 sprints faster. The other I would say is productivity gains, right? So oftentimes you're spending a lot of time in testing, working through bugs, building the pieces, right? The patterns. And, as you iterate on that, that's time spent, right? What if we gave that time back, right? That is value to our technology teams, to our app dev teams. So having that value and measure of we spent, 2,000 hours last year on this effort, now we're cutting it down to $1,200. Derive those labored hours to dollars, that's pretty big number, right? The last I would say is, when you connect the value of delivering capabilities to the business to outcomes. So in other words, how much more are we, making in revenue for this service? All of these pieces together, I think, are telling to like our finance team, are telling to our, internal technology teams who may need another project. We have the investment, and I would say ROI story from that perspective, because this work is adding value. The challenge is how do you put it in such a way where you could tie it back to a number, but also show it in terms of capability.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part, right? Is just kind of knowing a lot of these are a little bit less tangible maybe, or like, you're reducing hours, but how do you track such a thing? So I think, there's a ton out there that the possibilities are really endless, but it's kind of how do you get that data to derive those instances and those KPIs. So I think you can come at it, just like Sally was saying, from a multitude of lenses. If you're looking for more that are cost efficient driven, right? Getting down to that cost per team, per service, per product, right? Those avenues usually have a revenue line tied to them. So then you're kind of tying revenue and cost, and then there you go, you have a nice unit economics type of KPI. But then to Sally's point, there's other ones that are a little bit less tangible, or maybe there's metrics related to proving ROI on your FinOps team, right? Some of the FinOps governance that we have, you can show back, forecast variance, right? Report that out as a KPI to make sure that the teams are, forecasting appropriately and getting the right data inputs for forecasting. Show back, accuracy, right? How much of your infrastructure is being properly allocated to the teams that are using it from a chargeback, showback standpoint. And then also, savings, ROI, right? What kind of coverage are you keeping at, or savings plan utilization, right? So there's so many lenses to look at ROI by. I think it just depends on kind of the collaboration across teams, because a lot of that data will come from different areas of the business. But then also, looking just beyond cost to some of the other metrics that, Sally and I kind of brought up today.
If I could add one more thing to what you said, Brittany, which I think is really important, is from the FinOps team perspective, right? Because this is a group that's driving a lot of these initiatives in the organization. They're evangelizing best ways to save, right? The pattern adoption, deriving understanding what that team is helping drive in savings in the cloud. It's almost like a flywheel effect of you're building like a model where, yes, you're driving dollars back to the organization, and now you can reinvest it in something else. And I don't think that's often talked about is whether it's 10 million, 15 million, 7 million, those are real dollars that you could pour towards something that was unplanned for, which is certainly in technology space. And I think we both know there's always something that comes up that's unplanned for. And so I think from our perspective, FinOps has become more of that team that, we know the capabilities there, we could do more. And certainly with the future of FinOps and a lot of the AI and automation, we expect to see more ROI, right? But I do have to call out the importance of what that team is driving in terms of like embedding best practices for the teams.
No, definitely. And that was such a helpful structure that you both kind of went through, not just looking at cost savings, but the business agility, the productivity gains, and then also like revenue impact. And each of these things are like tell a part of your value story. And like you were mentioning earlier, Brittany, I think if you were to just look at cost savings as your only metric, it's kind of like if you're trying to buy a car and the only thing you're looking at is like fuel efficiency, right? It's important metric to look at, but you're also going to be looking at like the acceleration, the agility, the speed. Like there are all these other factors that come into play that tell kind of that holistic story of value. So definitely like looking at some of these metrics that you both mentioned alongside these dollar savings will really help kind of help you measure what matters most to the business. Okay, so now that we've talked about measuring and defining value, let's talk about some tools and making that value visible. We often think about tagging as like a technical hygiene kind of thing, for like accountability and reporting, but if done right, it could be a powerful way to add business context to your cloud spend. So Brittany, I'm curious from your consultant lens, like what does a good tagging strategy look like when it comes to proving value?
If anybody's familiar with FinOps, they've probably heard tagging, shortly after probably savings, right? Having a well-defined tagging strategy is absolutely pivotal to a lot of the kind of metrics and dimensions that Sally and I are talking about kind of today. So when we are consulting with clients on building out a tagging strategy or maybe just kind of fine-tuning the strategy that they have today, we try to focus it around kind of three major lenses or buckets, categories, and those tend to be lumped into financial-driven tags, technical, and then business. So from the financial lens, that is more of the accountability driver that you're talking about, right? Think something like a cost center code. Telling finance exactly who you can charge for this infrastructure, right? Pure accountability. The more technical lens centers around ownership of the resource, metadata around the resource, right? So answering questions like, what application is this infrastructure supporting, or is this a production instance or a development instance, right? Two very different resource types, and you'd probably treat them a very different way. Or if we needed to make a change to this resource, who would we contact, right? Like who's the true owner of this resource? It's more from that technical lens. But when we shift into kind of the business category of tagging, that's when we really unlock the value messaging that we're talking about today. So thinking of things, answering the question like what product is this infrastructure supporting, getting down maybe to that feature level or even a customer level, right? That's where you're kind of tying it directly to the business and giving business context to infrastructure. And that's more kind of what the human level can understand if you come outside of engineering. So that will often kind of inform what business metrics and KPIs are available based on how your infrastructure is built.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Sally, I'm sure you've used a lot of the strategies that Britt was just talking about when it comes to tagging, but I would love to know, could you share some examples of how you've used tagging to prove value at United?
Yeah, and I have to say first that tagging, absolutely agree with you. It's really key in measuring, understanding where things are at and spend in the cloud. I think one of the really good things that we had going for us at the tagging level was we had a very robust and mature app CI process. So today, anytime a new application or service is deployed, it gets a 3-letter acronym. It's registered to the CMDB for a lot of the same reasons you mentioned in terms of tracking operations, refreshes, life cycle of services, right? So I think really a lot of that process started from that aspect. As the cloud matured, we just piggybacked off of that great foundation, and that was really cloud tagging. So all the cloud tags are tied to a CI, app CI in the CMDB. And what that provides is a really unique view of, for every application, every service or resource running under it, how much and where it's located, what region it's located. And in addition to that, I have to give all the kudos to the teams, the CMDB teams who have an attestation process. So we got to make sure that when that asset's living in the wild, right, and it's, being deployed to, grown, that it's being also attested to, like, hey, is this asset still alive? Do we need to retire it? So there is a life cycle even from a management perspective. And obviously the tagging aspect also ties into that. So that will deprecate the resources in the cloud. But I think it's really opened the doors for so much level of analytics. I think we have so much data, and like any team or organization in that space is, now that you have all this information, how do you right size it and build the right metrics, build the right reporting? So I think, we've done a lot of that with the teams. We have our budgets, we have our anomaly detection, and we're able to give the team the power to make decisions based off of that. But tagging, I can't understate the importance of it, but I will say that a lot of it, like our success in reporting, has been because of that critical foundation. And I mean, in an environment as large and decentralized as ours, we have 650 plus applications in the cloud, 4,000 plus engineers developing actively in AWS. It's quite pivotal. So,
I mean, it's all about tagging for insights, right? And when you get down to the level of granularity that you were just talking about, then you're really able to easily tie it back to like business revenue. All right, so while we're on the topic of ROI, let's kind of like boil down. ROI really basically just comes down to what is the value that I'm getting out of every dollar spent. So let's kind of talk about the spend side of that equation for a little bit. Could you share some strategies on how to best optimize your cloud spend?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a ton of opportunity in this area, and I think a ton of opinions and strategies that we can talk through, but ultimately, I like to think of them in kind of like buckets or categories. So the first one that comes to mind, and I think some of the more like lower lift one, it would be like rate optimization, right? So this is really centered around getting the best rate for whatever resource you're running, right? So customers can tackle this in a multitude of ways, but mostly reservations, savings plans, spot instances, storage tiering, right? There's a bunch of strategies that the cloud providers allow. And then there's also those broader cloud provider discounts that you can commit to on a more high level scale that you can go into. So that's kind of like a huge category, and a lot of FinOps teams manage that from the higher level. I'd be curious if United does that as well.
yeah, absolutely. We totally take advantage of all the things you mentioned. I think one of the key things we've learned is when you step into those conversations like RIs, you're a PPA or your Mac and Microsoft, right? That you have a good view of what does the future look like for the organization? Where are we going to invest? Where do we need to add more dollars? Because that often would lead to a conversation around, well, if we have committed workloads, right? And often AWS and others want to know what can you commit so that you could expand your discount, right? So it leads to much more fruitful conversations of if you know you're going to grow, you know you're going to spend, take advantage of that discussion and that roadmap to build stronger PPA partnership agreements with your cloud providers. And I would say that it is quite a bit of work, and sometimes it's hard to know that, right? But it's totally worth the investment. We certainly do a lot of our RIs on savings plans. I would say that I'm also looking for the RI technology to catch up in automation space because we have so many that it is hard to track, but we're building a lot of analytics around that. But other things that we're doing is, an area that is often not talked about is lower environments, right? Like when you have these innovation environments, you're testing, you're building, often those are left in the peripheral, people forget, and they're rocking the bill, right? They're still logging data. So one of the things we started to do it as part of the tagging process is understanding what's living and not being used. Do we decommission, right? And that saved a lot of dollars and optimized cloud spend. The other key piece I would say is really giving the data to the leadership team, the teams who are responsible for managing their spend, their workloads through reporting, showback, right? So I know like Harness CCM has helped us with that. Daily, weekly reports against their budgets, anomaly detection in terms of spend. Those are powerful tools that when you provide it to the right audience, they can make better decisions on where they invest and where they shut things off. So.
Yeah, so I think I would categorize a lot of that of what you were kind of talking about as more like those usage optimization, right? And that often requires more of that data input, probably working with the engineering teams to make sure the data that you're providing or the insights and the opportunities that you're providing are really valuable, right? Because when you're talking about some of these usage optimizations, you're talking about right-sizing stuff, so really affecting workloads and kind of the scale that they have, deleting resources, right? Which is obviously, you want to get the right sign-offs, right? And you want to make sure that you're recommending to delete things that are actually being, not properly used or, just have gone away in the product life cycle, right? So yeah, all that usage optimization is really key for companies. A little bit higher lift, but can, at scale can really add up to a lot of savings. And I think a last kind of category that I would place things in is really shifting left in some of that optimization activity and really architecting with cloud efficiency in mind. So this can look like, using serverless technology, or staying modern with the instances that you're using, because they're usually pushing out cheaper rates as kind of instances come along. So all of that, it really starts to make it a little bit more proactive rather than being a little bit more reactive in terms of like the rate and usage optimization.
Coming off the point that you made that was really key, I think shifting a lot of that left is when you think about the teams that are already living in the cloud, they're already mature to some aspect, and they might be backtracking to some of the technical patterns that are more efficient. But the key opportunity you don't want to overlook as an organization is all of the teams that are moving from on-prem to the cloud, like the greenfield teams, the teams that have the right opportunity and are primed for being architected in such a way that they could scale efficiently once in the cloud. So that's a big effort I think we've put in with our architecture and engineering and FinOps teams, is building starter kits to the cloud. These are the pipelines you're going to need. This is the monitoring you're going to need from a synthetics and operations perspective, your cloud cost management portal, right? So giving them the tools they need up front and really building them in the best way, a good financial, responsible steward mindset from the beginning. So just, I think, overall a key piece where organizations that are shifting, an opportunity you don't want to miss from that perspective.
Yeah, and you both covered some really great strategies here, from rate optimization and utilizing RIs and SPs and usage optimization, and then finally also shifting left a lot of this stuff. And what I love is that everything that you said all kind of just ladders back up to smarter and more intentional cloud usage. But optimization is still only a part of the equation, right? So let's shift to something that is just as important, which is how your message is received across your org. Getting people to believe in your cloud value narrative is not just about data, it's also about trust, right? So Sally, I'm curious, from your experience at United, what has helped you build that confidence and credibility in the story that you're telling, and how has partnerships with, other teams like finance, engineering, or product helped kind of reinforce that trust?
One of the really important things that I think that our team has is we have a cross-team collaboration outside of engineering with the finance team, the PMO team, certainly our group's platform and cloud. And they're all bringing ideas together from their perspectives and portfolios of what's important for the organization. Certainly finance is going to think, how do we keep to budget and forecast our commitments? We're going to think about, from an engineering side, how do we scale things properly and give the teams the tools they need in the right cost optimized fashion, PMO coordinating all the bits and pieces between us. So as part of that, one of the things we've done is we've really invested time in developing and our reporting, our showback reporting. And as I mentioned earlier, like the tagging process was a really good conduit to allow us to mature that a lot better. So as we provide reports to the leadership team, they know that these are based off our budgets, right? And they're able to connect that back to real savings that they're seeing in the invoice and the dollars, and what they're seeing from like the cost portal in AWS. So the credibility, I think, I would say certainly was built over time. Like we had to do a lot of big wins, right, to show that, hey, these processes work, the technology works. But the reporting has been, I think, one of the key pieces that they look for to drive the right questions. And a lot of that was based on, are we reporting on the right things? Because we have so many app CIs. It is a sea of things, but really tailoring it to the team by VP, by MD director, and so on and so forth. Having a long line of visibility has sparked a lot of good conversations on where we could be better.
Now, Brittany, I know that you work with a lot of different organizations throughout their FinOps journey. So from your perspective, what is the best way to kind of foster that trust?
I think it's a lot of the points that Sally hit on, right? Communication and that collaboration, right? When people are brought into the conversations, they feel a level of invested in those outcomes, right? So I think it's all centered around, those topics that we've been touching on, right? The culture of FinOps at the organization. When you bring those, stakeholders into conversations early, for example, the tagging conversation, right? When we're creating a tagging strategy, you want finance in there, right? Because you want them to say, hey, how would you like this to end up on a GL ledger, right? Speaking their language and getting their thoughts in early. I feel like it only leads to more investment, unique point of views coming in, things that you might not have thought of. And it honestly leads to less cycles on the back end, right? Less iterations needed because you're thinking of it at that forefront. So I think the teams that we've seen the most success with is kind of like that, the diverse FinOps practice and having those allied personas come in because they often bring a unique point of view. And they bring their own set of business data, right? That you ultimately want to tie to on the back end. So it just leads to that kind of business metrics that we've been talking about this whole time, and then those kind of better together stories of how you can kind of combine those perspectives and then the data that goes along with them as well.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, FinOps isn't a solo function, right? It's a team sport. And so the more collaboration that you have with these teams, the more trust that you can build, and then ultimately the stronger your cloud value narrative becomes. All right, to close this out, I want to take us to the future. FinOps has come a long way. We've gone from sticker shock to cost control to optimization and enablement. But what's next? Where do you see the conversation going as organizations and their cloud usage continues to mature?
So as I think about the future, AI is really the talk of the town. It's embedding itself in a lot of the platforms and capabilities. So I see a world where FinOps AI is going to be the future. And what I mean by that is you're going to have algorithm bots like building reports for you real time, sifting through the metadata, making recommendations for RIs, right? Where should you right size and automatically doing it? So a lot of the manual work that you do today to purchase an RI, to commit to a savings plan, a lot of that will be automated. The other aspect I think that's going to become more refined is unit cost measurements, right? That's one of the biggest challenges right now across our peers, our other companies who are trying to get this right, is having a more refined cost to things, but also value, right? Where the capability through AI will start giving you more, this is how much it's costing, this is what you're deriving from a value perspective in your organization. So a lot of those capabilities, I think, are going to shift the practice, are going to, I would say, make it much more forefront in the conversation and really, accelerate business decisions, right? So that'll be a really exciting space. One of the things I also foresee happening is as teams migrate to the cloud faster, right? Everything lives in the cloud because our SaaS providers, big tech companies are building in the cloud, and they're building latest services in the cloud. So I think gone will be the day at some point where you'll have hybrid. Hybrid will live for some time, but as teams migrate, you're going to build more stress on compute, more stress on energy, right? So conversations will shift of like energy efficiency, right? So for everything I'm deploying, what does my carbon footprint look like, right? Certainly we're talking about it at the airline space with every flight that we take. How are we being, economically efficient and friendly with the environment in terms of our carbon footprint? So I think those are really exciting spaces. I think in a matter of time we'll be there, but certainly things are already shifting.
Yeah, I'm glad we can't have a conversation without AI. So I'm glad Celi checked that box for us. We are marked safe from the AI talks. But yeah, I think a lot of what Celi, I totally echo what she is saying. And then I think a lot of just through the conversation that we've had today, we're kind of realizing that FinOps isn't just kind of like a solo sport, right? It all centers around that collaboration. So I think we're already seeing the FinOps Foundation add other scopes and other personas to that framework. So I think we'll just continue to see that develop, more people kind of adopting a FinOps mindset. And FinOps into their day-to-day role. I think not only from a cost visibility standpoint, but I really think a lot of other personas have that other business data metric that they can bring to the FinOps table, right? So I think just more means into how do we kind of normalize some of that business data and how can we tie it into the FinOps world in different scopes and different personas will really just kind of really start to crack open this FinOps world and how we can measure value and just kind of keep adopting as the cloud only explodes.
Yeah, I mean, you both covered a lot of new and exciting things that are just kind of coming up in the world of FinOps. At FinOps X, the foundation was revealing how the scope of FinOps is changing. Sustainability is a huge aspect of it as well. And of course, AI. AI has embedded itself into every aspect of our lives. So FinOps is no exception there. So thank you for going through those. So if I were to kind of just wrap up this conversation a little bit, we've gone from mindset to metrics, from tagging to trust, from optimization to orchestration. If there's one thing that I think that people should walk away from this, it's that FinOps isn't just about cutting spend, right? It's about being able to effectively communicate why that spend matters. And with that, I want to thank both of you, Brittany and Sally, for joining me here today for such an insightful and impactful conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Amazing.
And thank you everyone for joining us here today. I hope you enjoyed the conversation just as much as I did.